implement this program in the future. So we know that KwaZulu-Natal has a very large burden of HIV. The most recent National Household Survey estimated 28% HIV prevalence among 15 to 49-year-olds. And there have also been very high estimates for HIV incidence, particularly among young women. But despite this large burden, there are ways to reduce the spread of HIV. We know that treating HIV-positive people and circumcising HIV-negative men can reduce HIV transmission. And the intervention that I want to focus on today is pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP, which we know when given to HIV-uninfected people can reduce the risk of HIV acquisition. But if we look at the various studies of PrEP, we see a large range of adherence and efficacy estimates, which tells us that if we were to implement a PrEP program, adherence would be very critical. And if we look at the study that had the highest estimates for efficacy and adherence, the Partners PrEP study, we see that they specifically enrolled serodiscordant couples. And there's evidence that testing and treating partners has many benefits, including increasing the uptake of HIV prevention methods, identifying and treating previously untested HIV-positive men, and identifying and preventing the spread of STIs, which we know can increase HIV transmission. So we hypothesized that coupling partner testing and linkage to care combined with PrEP target to young women could cost-effectively reduce HIV incidence. So to explore this hypothesis, we developed a math model of HIV transmission parameterized KwaZulu-Natal. And then we used the model to first estimate the impact and cost-effectiveness of just pre-exposure prophylaxis targeted to young women, and then PrEP with additional partner testing and linkage to care in KwaZulu-Natal. So here we see the structure of the model. On the upper left-hand corner, you see the two blue rectangles, which indicate HIV-uninfected people, and they can then be infected and progress through different stages of HIV. And HIV-negative people can go on PrEP, HIV-positive people can go on ART. And we also stratified the model by sex, age, sexual risk, and viral load, and parameterized the model to a study of home-based HIV testing counseling in KwaZulu-Natal. We assumed that with high adherence, ART and PrEP could reduce HIV transmission by 96% and 92% respectively, and that there's an annual dropout rate from each of these programs of 6%. And to simulate the benefit of partner testing, we assumed that in the partner testing scenario, dropout from PrEP is reduced to 3%. We also simulated 5-yearly community campaigns to achieve high testing rates and linkage to care and identify these HIV-uninfected young women. And we also assumed that people stay on PrEP for 5 years and on ART for life unless they drop out. And in the bottom row, you see our estimates for the annual cost of medication and counseling from the provider perspective. We also included hospitalization costs in South Africa, pre and post ART initiation, and discounted all costs by 3% annually. So we simulated 4 scenarios. In the first scenario, we assumed a baseline ART coverage of 36% of HIV-positive people being on ART. In the second scenario, we assumed that in addition to baseline, we also have these 5-yearly community campaigns where we can enroll additional 12% of people per year. In the third scenario, we assumed that during these 5-yearly campaigns, in addition to enrolling people on ART, we also enroll young women on PrEP. And finally, in the last scenario, we assume that in addition to PrEP, we also test and treat the HIV-positive partners of these young women. So this is the model's estimate for HIV incidence, and here in red, you see the baseline incidence with current ART coverage. With 5-yearly community campaigns, which are indicated by the black arrows, you see that in 10 years, HIV incidence would be reduced by 15%. And so in 10 years, there will have been 2 community campaigns. With the addition of PrEP, we see a 26% reduction in HIV incidence, and with additional partner testing, a 30% reduction in HIV incidence. This is a similar graph, but for HIV prevalence. And here again is the baseline HIV prevalence. And with 5-yearly community campaigns enrolling people on ART, we see a 3% reduction in HIV prevalence in 10 years. With PrEP, a slightly greater reduction at 12%. And if we add partner testing on top of that, 17% reduction in HIV prevalence. So this is the 10-year efficiency frontier of these scenarios. And so if we look, so the 4 points on this graph indicate the 4 scenarios that we modeled. And on the x-axis, we see the additional cumulative costs relative to the baseline scenario. And on the y-axis is the additional cumulative infections averted, so our measure of effectiveness. And if we move from baseline to the most cost-effective scenario, we make this efficiency frontier, which shows that the most cost-effective scenario is having home-based HTC with PrEP and partner testing and linkage to care. And we see that this is the most cost-effective scenario because the efficiency frontier minimizes costs and maximizes infections averted. So you see that the other 2 points are below this line. We can also look at the 2 points on the right, the red square and the green triangle. And the difference between the two is that the green triangle also includes partner testing and linkage to care. And we see that the addition of that service slightly increases costs, but gives us a relatively large increase in infections averted. So these are the incremental cost effectiveness ratios, which basically puts a cost per infection averted to the graph that we just saw. And we see that our most cost-effective scenario costs $4,700 per infection averted after 10 years, and that this cost decreases after 20 years. Now, if there were the case where we could put people on PrEP but didn't test and treat their partners, we see that the costs are still are similar but slightly higher, and also notice that the cost of PrEP decreases faster than the cost of just home-based HTC when we look at the 20-year time horizon. And if we compare these estimates to other estimates in the modeling literature, we see that they're slightly lower, which is most likely because we modeled a high incidence setting. Now, this is a similar table, but for quality adjusted life years gained. And we see that all of the costs are less than or equal to $1,000. And it's less than South Africa's per capita GDP, and actually less than half of South Africa's per capita GDP. So it's very cost effective. And again, the costs decrease after 20 years. And if we were to do a similar exercise where we remove the last row, just to look at the impact or the cost of PrEP, we see that it's higher than the other estimates, but it's still less than South Africa's per capita GDP. And also, the cost decreases more rapidly when we look at the 20-year time horizon, so it drops by almost 2/3. So based on this, we see that targeting PrEP to young women and testing their partners and linking their HIV-positive partners to ART can be cost-effective for HIV prevention. We also see that the preventive benefits of PrEP are seen long-term, whereas the preventive benefits of ART are, for the most part, short-term, and that this hybrid approach of PrEP and partner testing linkage to care really draws out the synergy between the two. This model was limited in that we specifically modeled rural KwaZulu-Natal, so we can't extrapolate to other provinces or even other countries. Also, in reality, the relationship between adherence and efficacy, which we know is critical to PrEP, is much more nuanced than we modeled. And also, we didn't include all of the benefits of partner testing and linkage to care, such as identifying and treating STIs and increasing the uptake of other HIV prevention services, such as condom use. So finally, if we were to implement this program in the future, we would most likely need a broader definition of partnership, because current definitions mostly include cohabitation and having children, and we know that for young couples, these criteria may not fit. We may also need enhanced counseling messages because these young couples are often unstable. We also know that PrEP costs will most likely decrease in the future as knowledge of PrEP increases. I'm sorry if that was scary. And we may also need new platforms for reaching young people. In this model, we simulate home-based HTC, but other venues such as antenatal care clinics and churches and schools may also be appropriate. And we also know that longer-acting injectable PrEP and ARVs are in development, and they may improve adherence. Finally, I'd like to thank my colleagues at the University of Washington International Clinical Research Center and at the Human Sciences Research Council, and our funders. Thank you.